English translation. 907th contact. Wednesday, 5th March 2025. 9:08 hours. 907th contact Wednesday, 5th March 2025. 9:08 hours.
Excuse me for keeping you waiting, but when you waved me out, I briefly told you that Michael would disconnect the phone quite quickly, which he did for me. But that you were coming now, instead of at 1000 hours, as you told me, so I thought that Michael and I would still have enough time to my friend. But it is really not for me, because I'm not interested in the whole thing in terms of, as I've already told you, but it is a friendly service, as they say. But I have agreed that I will do some research and get to the bottom of it. But I have asked Michael to speak for me on the phone, because since my stroke I sometimes have a lot of trouble talking, and I am currently going through a phase that is unfortunately getting a bit osartet, to get very badly out of control of the good human nature. So,
I understand that it was unusual for me, that is why I drew your attention to me with the hand gesture from the entrance, to which you...
Of course, that is why I also came out to you. But you are a bit impatient, my friend, that you are still.
That is right. Patience is not my strong suit.
I did not realize that, but it worked out after all.
That is right. Now, however, I should convey the following to you, which our committee deems necessary, that you should be concerned about making this really known worldwide for all Figu groupings, because apparently various Figu members still have the false assumption and misconception, as well as erroneous beliefs, that you are a very distant descendant of the Nokodemion lineage, which is not the case. The truth is that all heralds of the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the creation energy, the teaching of the life have always been simple and ordinary human beings since Nokodemion passed away, both in our ANKAR universe and also in this Dern universe on planet Earth. Our committee has stated the following, which I now dictate to you.
All the Nokodemion teaching heralds in our ANKAR universe were ordinary human beings, just as all the heralds of the teaching were Earth-born and died on Earth. They were all, like any life form, enlivened by the absolutely normal creation life energy. And all heralds were conceived and born in a natural manner, and also taught or trained in a normal wise way by pledgerin teachers according to the teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life by Nokodemion. This teaching was taught and spread by him about 9 billion years ago in the ANKAR universe in the pledgerin system as a herald and has been preserved verbatim and without falsification over all these billions of years. This for the benefit of human beings, to become true human beings within themselves, to create peace within themselves, and to become peaceful within themselves, and also to create and spread freedom, equality and peace to the outside world. All the proclaimers of Nokodemion's teaching, this must be absolutely clear, were never reincarnations of his person and his creation life energy that enlivened him at that time over all the billions of years. But all the persons of the proclaimers were called into life and existence by the constantly changing and neutral energy form that enlivens a new personality each time. Consequently, there has never been a rebirth of the same personality, because such a rebirth is absolutely impossible. The rebirth of the same creation life energy and the same person is only based on a wishful thinking of a false teaching and a mistaken fantasy of human beings who are not sensible and real according to reality and truth, confused and trapped by religions, beliefs and desires, etc., influenced by a pseudo-thinking of bizarre illusions as their purpose in life. Note: when the writings and contact reports speak of Billy being the carrier of the Nokodemion creation energy form, it must be clear that this is the much more developed creation energy form of the original Nokodemion in many lives, so that today's form cannot be compared with that of the past. It is therefore in no wise a matter of a rebirth of the same personality, which is not possible, but solely of the creation life energy enlivening factor that has evolved and which currently enlivens Billy.
I think that is good. Thank you very much, Quetzal. And also thank you to the committee. The fact that 1.5 million human beings are involved in this, the whole committee, that the teaching of Nokodemion can be spread here on Earth, that is phenomenal. My sincere thanks to the committee.
I will do that. But there is one more thing. We have noticed that you captured with your camera in Uiticon when Asket and others of us Pleiaren were on an exploratory flight in a V formation, which caused certain Earth humans, and also in other countries such as America and England, and etc., to take up the flying apparatus of foreigners, which are simply called UFOs, which has almost led to a worldwide exaggerated attention, and today the longer the more it is brought up. You should publicize this photo, which was probably the first of its kind here in Switzerland and has had a great impact in this context among FIGU members around the world.
But thank you for the photo. It could be that Bernadette will be able to use it during our conversation. I will ask her to insert it, because as far as I know, she should still have it in her archive.
Herr Eduard Meier UFO Gruppe 308 ZH Schweiz hat die Aufnahme einer 5er V-Formation von UFOs zur Verfügung gestellt. Sie ist am 8. Juni 1950, 2:30 Uhr einstündlich. Die Dauer der Störung betrug 1,5 Minuten. Flughöhe war 1300 bis 1700 Meter. Geschwindigkeit etwa 650 Kilometer. Der Durchflug erfolgte geräuschlos. Die Objekte wiesen als Farbe blasses Orange auf. Der UFO-Freund teilt wörtlich mit. Als ob diese Objekte wussten, dass ich sie auf den Film bannen wollte, blieben sie sozusagen mitten im Flug stehen, als ob sie plötzlich in der freien Luft hängen geblieben wären. Da bestätigte ich natürlich prompt eine Auslöser meiner stets schussbereiten Kamera.
Mr. Edward Meier UFO Group, 308ZH/Switzerland, has requested the recording of a 5V formation of UFOs at his disposal. It is on June 8, 1950, 2:30 a.m., 1 hour. The duration of the disturbance was 1.5 minutes. Flight altitude was 1,300 to 1,700 meters. The speed was about 650 kilometers. The flight was noiseless. The objects were pale orange in color. The UFO friend literally reports, as if these objects knew that I wanted to capture them on film, they stopped in mid-flight, so to speak, as if they had suddenly stopped in mid-air. Of course, I promptly activated the shutter of my camera, which was always ready to shoot.
Good. What else I want to say relates to the corona pandemic. Because in this regard, we have noticed that there are still questions and assumptions coming from various offices, etc., questions and assumptions about how and where the rampantly spreading disease originated. This should
Pointless, because what was to be said about corona? I clearly said and explained yes, namely that originally by an American out of revenge in China, the development of the disease was agreed there with the then government leader, which was developed in laboratories, but escaped early on through carelessness and mutated many times, causing various diseases and even epidemics to develop. The last time the coronavirus was released into the open due to another carelessness was in Wuhan, where it was able to spread worldwide. The whole thing has cost well over 22 million human lives, mainly due to the idiotic vaccinations, which are still being given, although their composition has been changed. However, it is said that many people are still dying from these vaccinations because the vaccine is still inadequate. But that does not seem to matter at all, because the only important thing seems to be that an immense amount of money is made from it, equally from war and the manufacture and sale of weapons, with which masses of human beings are shot and murdered by passionate murderers according to their pleasure and desire, in addition to causing immense destruction. They call this their duty to the fatherland when they do this as soldiers and commit murder after murder, with the lazy excuse that it has to be done and that they have no other choice because they are obliged to be soldiers and murder. But why they do not refuse out of cowardice and allow themselves to be drafted into military service, they have no answer or do not want to give one, because murdering and destroying is fundamentally a self-invented evil passion for them, which obviously gives them pleasure when they see that human beings unknown to them die as a result of their murderous actions, so there is no excuse for them. If, in all honesty, they do not want to indulge in murder, then they could refuse military service to the murderous organizations. But there are too many of them who take pleasure in murder and destruction, and often also in torture and rape. In this respect, they prove that the bulk of Earth humans, the very ones who escalate murderously and otherwise viciously, are mighty much worse than degenerate predators of all genus and species. Now, this is to say what the term UFO is all about, because NASA has changed a lot in this respect, namely that it no longer calls the objects UFO, that is to say, unidentified flying object, but UAP, which means unidentified aerial phenomena. But now something else. It has to be said openly because I was asked about it and I want to bring it up now, why I suddenly rush off to come to my office where you are waiting for me. It is when I am being called by something other than my voice, when I am in conversation with someone, etc., and if I do not realize that I am being called because I am concentrating on a conversation with someone, then you call me on the phone. But sometimes I do not notice it because you use the trick of not ringing loudly, but just flashing red on the phone, which I sometimes see, or not. And because this is the case, Madeline called me in the parlor last Friday, for example, and said that someone had called from here in the office to the kitchen, where practically all the core group members were present, but they obviously did not notice anything about your call and the phone lighting up. But Madeline obviously saw this, because she often pays attention to it. So, as usual, you did the whole thing, rang in such a way that only the red light of the telephone lit up. And as it happened again, because I could not see it because I was sitting on the sofa in the parlor with Ava and Selena and was absorbed by the news, she called me. It was just that I was simply absorbed, namely because the television was showing how U.S. President Trump was thoroughly beating up the lying, warmongering, war criminal President Zelensky.
Of course I saw that you were in the living room with Eva and Selena. But you, that is Eva and you, were so preoccupied with what was going on in the U.S. and what you were talking about that you did not notice my shouting. Besides, you cannot see the red light of the phone from where you are sitting, and you do not want it to ring. For this reason, I endeavored to make Madeline aware of my telephone call, but she saw the red light on the phone because she is very attentive in this respect and called you immediately, which is why you came here. But what happened the day before yesterday was a little different. You were also so engrossed in conversation with Eva in the living room that you did not see the red light flashing on the phone, which is why I knocked on the door, whereupon Eva and you shouted for me to come in, which of course I was not allowed to do, and you opened the door and saw me, which is why you immediately came here to your workroom.
Excuse me, please, but I was really interested in what Eva and I saw on TV and we had to talk to each other about. Namely what happened, and we just talked about it. And what it was all about is very clear and explicit in the following article from the internet medium Infosperber, which generally publishes a great deal of information that is probably concealed in all other media due to fear or cowardice, etc. Which means that their readership is not really presented with the information that they fundamentally and truthfully want to know. I think you should also read this, even if you overheard everything when the clumsy Trump was denouncing Zelensky. And Bernadette will edit this article for me so that I can then also include it in our conversation, so that it can also be read by the readership of the contact reports when they are published by Figu.
There is no need to apologize because I did not tell you when I was coming here, so you probably thought I would be late.
I actually did.
I did not think of that until later, unfortunately. Regarding the article, it is worth saying that we all followed the debacle between Trump and Zelensky, but I still want to read this.
Well, it is no big deal. Then please, you can read the article here on the computer. Just a moment, please.
Trump responds to Zelensky's demands. White House/Forbes.
The historic undiplomatic dispute is documented here. It is good for the American people to know what is going on, President Trump said at the end of the 50 minutes UPG.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky used the long public appearance to tell the US what he thinks, until Donald Trump pointed out that he would have lost the war long ago without US help. This public confrontation in front of the international media will go down in history. That is why we are publishing the unabridged media appearance online here. The translation of the last heated passages in German source R&D.
Hi, I will be the voice of Vance.
Hi, I will be the voice of Zelensky.
Hi, I will be the voice of Trump.
I am talking about the kind of diplomacy that can put an end to the destruction of your country. Mr. President, Zelensky, Mr. President, respectfully. I think it is disrespectful for you to come into the U.S. President's Oval Office to try to make this argument in front of the American media. Right now, you are going around forcing draftees to the front lines because you are running out of supplies. You should thank the President, Trump, for trying to end this conflict.
Have you, Vance, ever been to Ukraine to say what our problems are?
I have never been.
Then come one time.
I have watched and seen the stories. I know what is going on. You are taking people on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you not agree that you have also had problems recruiting people into your military?
We have problems. I will answer. I will answer.
And do you think it is respectful to come into the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the government that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
Lots of questions, but let us start at the beginning.
So,
First of all, during a war, everyone has problems, even you. But you have a beautiful ocean and you do not realize it now, but you will feel it in the future. My God, may God.
You do not know that do not tell us what we are going to feel. We are trying to solve a problem. Do not tell us what we are going to feel.
I am not telling you that. I am answering a question.
Because you are in no position to determine that. Remember that. You are in no position to determine what we are going to feel. We are going to feel very good.
You are going to feel the impact.
We will feel very good and strong. They are not in a good place right now. They have allowed themselves to be in a bad position. And he, Vance, is right about that.
Right from the beginning of the war.
They are not in a good position. You do not hold the cards. With us, you're starting to have cards now. You are playing cards right now.
I am not playing cards. I am very serious, Mr. President. I am very serious. I am the president during a war.
You are playing cards. You are putting the lives of millions of human beings at risk. You are risking a third world war. You are risking a third world war. And what you are doing is very disrespectful to the country.
I speak with all due respect.
Disrespectful to this country that has supported you far more than many people said you should have been supported. Should have supported you.
Did you say thank you once?
Many times.
During that meeting? During this whole meeting, did you say thank you?
Even today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Do you show your gratitude to the United States and to the president who is trying to save your country?
Please think that if you're going to speak very loudly about the war, then you can.
He does not speak loudly. He's not speaking up. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I answer?
No, you have already spoken a lot. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You are not winning. You are not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out, okay? Thanks to us.
We are staying, Mr. President. We are staying in our country. We remain strong. From the beginning of the war, we have been alone. And we are grateful. I have said thank you in this cabinet.
You have not been alone. You have not been alone. We gave you, through this stupid President Trump's predecessor, Joe Biden, $350 billion.
You voted for your president, hard to hear acoustically.
We gave you military equipment. Your men are brave, but they had to use our military equipment.
You invited me to speak.
If you hadn't had our military equipment, this war would have been over in a fortnight.
In 3 days, I heard this from Vladimir Putin. In 3 days. That is something.
Maybe less.
Within 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It is going to be very hard to do business that way. I will tell you that.
Say thank you.
I have said thank you many times to the American people.
And accept that there are differences of opinion, and let us have those differences of opinion, instead of arguing about it in front of the American media when you are wrong. We know you are not right.
I think it is good for the human beings of America to see what is going on. I think it is very important. That is why we let this go on so long. You, Zelensky, have to be grateful. You are not holding the cards.
I'm grateful.
You are landlocked there. Your people are dying. They do not have enough soldiers.
I can tell you again. Please do not, Mr. President.
Listen, you do not have enough soldiers. That would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I do not want a ceasefire. I do not want a ceasefire. Listen, you could get a ceasefire now. And I say to you, do it so that the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed. Zelensky, of course we want to end the war. But you say you do not want a ceasefire. I want a ceasefire.
I told you, with security guarantees. Ask our human beings what they think about a ceasefire. It is all the same to you?
This does not correspond to a good translation, but the good says what the tiresome conversation actually entailed, but which will be received unkindly and partisanly by the Zelensky-friendly and partisan far and wide in Europe, and also in other states. However, the fact that what Trump loudly reproached Zelensky for, which was justified and interpreted in a way that corresponded and still corresponds to reality, will trigger false reactions to the contrary, especially among the various state powers in Germany, France and England, and among some Zelensky-friendly members of the population, but also among the leaders of the EU dictatorship, as you rightly call them. This will also be especially true if it becomes known that Trump has ordered the temporary termination of arms assistance for a short time, as well as the cancellation of intelligence assistance and information to Zelensky, and also the cancellation of authoritative tips to the Ukrainian army, at least for a short time. For the time being, this will also mean that the transmission of important satellite surveillance data, which Zelensky used to ensure that he and his inadequate army were able to hold their own against Russia, will cease at least for a short time. If, after some time, Zelensky then agrees to a deal for the extraction of various natural resources, there are various natural resources in Ukraine that can be extracted and that America urgently needs, the fickle Trump will change his mind about Zelensky. Moreover, in his insane actions, he does not realize that the biggest supplier of weapons to Zelensky apart from America, namely Germany, is starting to rearm the German army, erroneously and crazily, with hundreds of billions of euros, because the neo-Nazi rulers are cowardly and afraid, as you said, that Russia will take warlike revenge on those states that have supplied and are supplying weapons to Zelensky, thereby provoking another world war. And this is how the neo-Nazis, who do not even realize in their low intelligence or in their non-thinking that they are such neo-Nazis and hold such views, think. So they are also afraid that the whole of Europe will come to the cash register, as you say, and will be attacked by Russia. And this is how all the pro-Zelensky and pro-American leaders of all states think, who have been completely unconcerned about arms deliveries, etc., because they have allowed themselves to be encouraged by Germany and the EU dictatorship, and especially by France and England, to also expand their armies. Unfortunately, as you yourself mention, this also includes Switzerland, whose neutrality has been undone by traitors to the country, namely by persons with government status who, as you say, are left scot-free.
Unfortunately, because one crow does not peck out another's eye, as the saying has been used in our country since time immemorial, because there are sometimes completely unworthy people in government, also here in Switzerland, who neither understand nor appreciate our achieved national neutrality. And as a rule, they are all lowly intelligent elements who were born long after the last World War and have no idea how unspeakably valuable our Swiss neutrality was when the Nazis sang, "Little Switzerland, the porcupine, we will take it in retreat." Fortunately, this did not happen, as the Nazi retreat was a capitulation and a loss of the war. But our country's neutrality, not the Swiss army, which would have been run down, saved us from being invaded by the Nazis, because it was just too risky to cash in on Switzerland before the war was won. And all those who valued Switzerland and its neutrality, which also included Adolf Hitler, as Svath knew very well, had a safe haven or refuge in our country and respected it so much that they could find shelter in an emergency. But the fact that Hitler did not flee to Switzerland was precisely because, as I had already mentioned in a previous conversation. However, the fact that for some time now there have been flirtations and attempts to treacherously gain access to the EU dictatorship and NATO is a bombshell. I did not know that America was assisting the warmongering Zelensky with constant intelligence information on warfare and also with satellite surveillance images in this regard, which Bermunda already told me, but that this is now to become public knowledge. But on the other hand, I know from her that all those female and male idiots of practically all the governments of all the countries of Europe are full of fear and cowardice and want to spend hundreds of billions and possibly trillions on their military armies to procure weapons as a result of what Trump is insanely instigating and bringing unpleasantness worldwide and destroying the otherwise already lousy order of humanity even more. There is now a roaring fear because the idiotically inclined European governments, especially those of Germany, France and England as well as the EU dictatorship, have helped America and Zelensky, and thus Ukraine with their big mouths with weapons, money, promises, and war friendship, etc., and some of them still do. That is why they are now squirming in fear and cowardice that they will be attacked militarily by Russia in revenge, which is why they now want to continue to arm and build up their military armies at the expense of the population. Of course, as I said, all at the expense of the population, who otherwise have to stand up and take the rap for the war-promoting madness and insanity with taxpayers' money, whereby a large part does not agree with this, but cannot do anything about it because the rulers and their supporters do what they want. All around, the power-hungry governments are lying like hell and deceiving the people by presenting everything differently than it corresponds to the truth. This is the case, for example, with the war in Ukraine, which is effectively only being waged by America. With the war-mongering puppet Zelensky arranging everything as he is directed and ordered and directed by America, according to information from U.S. intelligence and U.S. satellites. Likewise, comprehensive journalism and all the media are also directed by America, which is why there is only ever one-sided war reporting, namely exclusively in such a way that only the great suffering of Ukraine and its population is reported on, but the same is deliberately kept completely silent about Russia. In this respect, reports are also only made about the Ukrainian soldiers injured in the war, who are in pain, or who have been crippled or have died, in order to show the misery that the war against Russia and Ukraine has demanded and required. But not a word is said about the fact that soldiers in the Russian military suffer the same pain, and also many similar crippling injuries and deaths. And if one or the other soldier on this or that side complains about his pain or crippling, then the question is why he went to war and did not refuse to go or did not flee. Does it not stand to reason that he went to war voluntarily for the sheer joy of killing, as unscrupulous mercenaries do? If there is a state obligation for military service, but this does not want to be carried out due to a perception of responsibility, because every military is a murderous organization, and kills by war or punishment through executions and murders en masse through war, then every human being is free to refuse or, if necessary, to flee to another country that does not extradite military refugees. So if wise men said in ancient times, "Thou shalt not kill," without even having to resort to the lies of the Bible, then it is clear to every absolutely responsible human being equipped with understanding and reason that life is to be preserved individually, and that no human being should ever be harmed, injured, or even killed in any way. The law of life states that every human life should be protected from all harm and violence, as should also all animal and creature life, and all life forms of all fauna and flora in general. No life whatsoever should be harmed, and all of creation in general should be treated with dignity and honor, because nature, all fauna and flora, and all existence in general is creation, which should be appreciated and honored by human beings, but not an imaginary religious god, who is begged, pleaded with, and worshipped in a dog-like manner, uselessly seeking help. This, while the human being himself is the highest in the existence of his life, for it is solely through his thoughts that he controls the ups and downs of his life, and finds his way in existence. Consequently, he himself and alone determines his weal and woe, or how he allows the influence of his fellow human beings to determine it. If, despite the "thou shalt not kill," every human being kills or harms other human beings, for whatever and in any case always flimsy, unfounded reasons, because there are never reasons for killing or harming human beings, he is often less than a beast of prey or a predator, because such an animal kills instinctively and instinctively for the sake of its food or for the sake of its defense. The predator has the innate instinct-driven ability, in situations of hunger, to act in absolutely no wise consciously, but effectively only to apply an instinct-driven and for itself correct life-sustaining behavior. This is in order to obtain food by tearing and killing other animals and creatures and then eating them. This happens through inner instinctive impulses that make the predator do the correct thing in situations of hunger without overthinking, thereby keeping itself alive. If, in contrast to the predator, we now consider the human being, who is said to have logic, understanding, and reason, then it is quite clear that, in addition to his instinct and instinctive behavior, he also has a valuable consciousness with which he can think, decide, and also act consciously with complete clarity and awareness. The human being is therefore far superior in this respect to any predator, which acts and kills only instinctively and unconsciously in order to feed or defend itself. The human being, on the other hand, who normally has a healthy consciousness and therefore also logic, understanding and reason, with the exception of those who are consciously ill in some way, should therefore also use his thoughts healthily and normally in peace and freedom in order to make the correct decisions and then act accordingly. But this is exactly what the majority of Earth humans do not do, for only an absolute minority of human beings embrace correct and responsible thinking, and also try to involve their fellow human beings without rebuke. But this is only rewarded with insults, ingratitude, and even malicious violence, because only faith and illusory thinking prevail, and reality and its truth are not seen and recognized. Well, it is not only those human beings who go to war out of passion, or because they allow themselves to be forced into it, but not infrequently, many human beings from the population also turn out to be completely worse than predators. Because deep in their character, which has been malformed by self-education, there is a desire for crime and also for crimes of all kinds. And because the mania for wealth and money is becoming more and more prevalent and people no longer want to work honestly for an income, all evil is becoming more and more asartung. In addition, general education dwindles very quickly, and large sections of human beings very often degenerate through vices and addictions of all kinds, such as drug abuse or alcohol, etc. on the other hand. However, many human beings fantasize about actors, artists, and sports people, etc., becoming fanatics instead of making an effort and achieving something they could be proud of themselves. Especially with regard to doing something useful for the preservation of nature, wildlife, and the biodiversity of fauna and flora, so that these can be preserved and thus also ensure the existence of humanity. In fact, it is already the case today that between 50,000 and 60,000 species of all genera and species of wildlife, fauna and flora are being wiped out carelessly, indifferently, and irresponsibly every year. The protection of biodiversity is therefore nil because nothing is being done about it, because only an absolute minority cares about it, if at all, and not for the sake of monetary gain. However, great evils occur because many human beings do not work but want to have lots of money to spend, which is why thievery, fraud, robberies, and murders are already part of everyday life, as are murders for greed and avarice. But other murders have also long been the order of the day, such as passion killings, pathological and vengeful mass murders. Murders motivated by addiction and lust are becoming more and more common, as are love murders and sex murders, child murders and murder for satisfaction, murder for greed, murders to cover up criminal offenses, jealousy murders and manslaughter, anger murders and murders for base motives, murders for hire, narcissism murders, infidelity murders, murders of faith and other evil delusions, murders to break faith, and well, if it will or should come to another world war as a result of this and effectively through the fault of those in power, then Matthew is at the last anyway. All those countries whose governments and parts of their populations irresponsibly interfered in the affairs of Ukraine, Zelensky. America, Putin, also include Switzerland, whose neutrality was turned into a pig by the rulers in Bern. And those responsible in Bern, the politicians in charge, now crazily believe, like the mad rulers of other countries, that the military must now be vehemently rearmed at the expense of the Swiss, the taxpayers, because they now live in fear and under the delusion that the country can really be defended militarily if it is attacked. But all this is more than illusory. Absolute neutrality could have prevented this fear if it had not been broken in a treacherous manner, thereby creating a bad enmity. And those idiotic rulers of the kind who, in their treasonous efforts, are trying to link up with the EU dictatorship and the NATO murderous organization, are preventing this from being put right again, so that absolute neutrality really does refrain from any enmity.
What you say cannot be disputed, for this is indeed the truth, and also that when a human being goes to war, he is fully and clearly aware that he will kill and thus become a murderer. Consequently, he is therefore also undeniably willing to do so, which is why there is no excuse me whatsoever if this is then actually done, and it is mendaciously claimed that it was done in self-defense. Because in a war there is no such thing, because in any case, everything is always geared towards killing.
Okay, Then everything is clear and in order.
But this obviously not. What is next to it? You did not answer that question.
I deliberately forgot that, because I do not want to deal with questions in any wise. It would take up a lot of my time, and I would not be able to do my job. Besides, I do not know for the life of me how this one got here.
You should answer them anyway, though, even if you refuse to accept help from us for your health, which you already did with my grandfather, even though he killed you at the age of a few mo.
You talk too much, my friend, for I am an earthling, and have no more right than any other. Consequently, I never accept your help for my health. And that Svath helped me back then. Shortly after I was born, I could not help it.
That was so, I know that.
Hogwash, and that is it. When the time comes, I will just go, like everyone else. And there is no point in arguing about it. Then I can now talk about what is new in America, which I'm sure you are aware of. Namely that Donald Trump is no better than Zelensky, just in a different way, and in the style that he no longer shouts America should be great again, but now uses America is back. In other words, his statements are more of a shout than an actual speech. This was also pictorially demonstrated this morning on the morning news on television, in the wise way in which he now gave a crazy speech to Congress for 99 minutes and proclaimed that the previous and really senile and decrepit and sectarian, as Trump himself is sectarian as a new and self-important and megalomaniacal U.S. presidential tramp. Incumbent U.S. President Joseph Robinette Biden was the worst ever in American history. This, as well as the fact that, in his clearly recognizable megalomania, he also boastfully claimed that he had done more good in his short current second presidential term to date than any U.S. president before him had done in the entire course of their 4 years in office. He also praised the multimillionaire Elon Musk, who has already been taken to court several times and who, under Trump's patronage, is now creating a very strange order in America in all offices, etc., together with Trump, namely by firing masses of employees from various offices and even closing offices.
That results in the future as a shot in the dark, as you say in each case.
Yes, I know that because I was traveling with Bermunda, Florina, and Njana for days on end several times, as you know, also with you. And there we saw and experienced all the things that will happen.
Of course I do not forget that, as I also do not forget that Bridget often cuts your hair shorter during these times.
But it was not important to mention that now, but rather that there is already popular resistance in America against Donald Trump and Elon Musk, which Trump is certainly threatening to take action against, at least among universities and other various groups, as is also the case in other countries around the world. And what will ultimately result from all this? With U.S. President Donald Trump, of course, also playing a decisive role in ensuring that everything really runs like clockwork, and that Musk's delusion, together with Trump, whose appearance and behavior is strongly characterized by narcissism, and thus by a personality disorder that cannot be overlooked, is actually to be fulfilled, is what the following article says, which shows what the goal of Musk and Trump and all the technocrats as a whole should be. I received the article from Aachen in Germany, and you should read it. Here it is.
This is not going to be something pleasant, rather.
I also think so. Namely, lowly intelligent and simple-minded, and thoroughly typical, and tailored to what these kinds of rich people cherish in their fantasies, and believe they could eat the world. In my opinion, Musk is just a redneck who is not blessed with great wisdom, as I see it. He is certainly good regarding his business management, which after all is said to have earned him a fortune of $100 billion.
Let us see what the man has in mind.
President Elon Musk's Big American Reboot. World Note Nuff, February 28, 2025.
To truly understand the activities of President Elon Musk and his administration, one must assume that he is an agent of the deep state of the international trillionaire class. Any other approach leads to failure. Musk bypassed the electoral process and bought his place in the Oval Office with $288 million in campaign contributions to Republicans. These are the facts. If you want to know what President Musk really does, you have to understand what his clients want, and bear in mind that we are still in the Great Reset phase. Every crisis is part of the plan. What we are experiencing is the birth of a new era, a wake-up call to overhaul our institutions, our systems, and most importantly, our thinking, and to adapt our attitudes and values to the needs of a world that rightly demands, rightly expects a much higher level of responsibility and accountability. If we recognize this crisis as truly transformative, we can lay the foundations for a more stable, sustainable, and even prosperous world. Klaus Schwab on the Global Redesign Initiative, 2009 Top 10 Goals of the Technocrats 1. A global technocracy. Their ultimate goal is to create a global surveillance police state controlled by a corporate-style elite. Corporate-style elite. Second, digital money linked to a social credit system. Digital money is no longer seen as a commodity or a means of payment, but as a contract between the rulers and the ruled. The ruled, obedience to the system determines the account balance. 3. Artificial intelligence takes control. The globalists are striving for an automatically regulated society in which robots, drones, and algorithms monitor and control the population. Voice surveillance in social media is just the beginning. 4. Regionalism. Instead of nation-states, Trump wanted to buy Greenland and annex Canada, a first step towards the North American Union. The planet is being divided into several geopolitical poles of power based on Samuel P. Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. National borders are replaced by city-states. 5. Homo Deus, the next stage of humanity. According to WEF thought leader Yuval Harari, technological progress could change human beings, improved physical and mental capabilities, redefining human values and beliefs. 6. Urbanization and dispossession of farmers. Farmers are driven into bankruptcy, their land confiscated. Robot-controlled factory farms replace agriculture. 15-minute cities are created to concentrate human beings in urban centers. 7. Ukraine as the Israel of the East. The war in Ukraine is not about democracy, but about the control of the country by a global elite. Zionist actors are driving the dispossession of Ukrainians. Millions of internally displaced persons and refugees worldwide are part of the plan. 8. The Greater Israel Project and the destruction of Palestine. Israel is seen as a geostrategic jewel for global conquest. Control over Palestine is essential for the globalists. 9. Abolition of democracy, constitutions and civil rights. The globalists are opposed to religion and traditional values. Freedom and civil rights are to be replaced by technocracy. 10. The dismantling of the U.S. government, Musk's Doge Department of Government Efficiency project is destroying American institutions. The Zeal, a technocratic dictatorship under Musk & Co. What does Elon want? Elon Musk is a billionaire technocrat with $22 billion in contracts with NASA and DARPA. His mission, thousands of LEO satellites for global mass surveillance. Project Blackjack and Pit Boss, AI-controlled satellites for real-time surveillance. Graphene in vaccines, connection to the Internet of Bio-Nano-Things IOBNT. 5G and 6G networks for data transmission. Control over human beings down to the cellular level. DARPA's Blackjack program aims to develop a high-speed global low Earth orbit (LEO) network that will provide the U.S. Department of Defense with highly interconnected, resilient and durable coverage. DARPA Project Casino, commercially augmented space internetworked. Operations, Stargate data centers for the expansion of the surveillance architecture, Musk and the PayPal Mafia. Musk is part of a Silicon Valley elite known as the PayPal Mafia members. Peter Thiel Palantir, Facebook investor, Reid Hoffman LinkedIn, Microsoft, Max Levchin PayPal, Affirm, Chad Hurley and Steve Chen YouTube, David Sachs Yammer, Janie. This group has close ties to governments, the military and the financial world. After the US election in 2024, The Economist wrote, "With the re-election of Donald Trump, the PayPal Mafia has taken control of the US government." Musk and the deep state CNN and Time report that Musk acts as the most powerful bureaucrat in US history, without democratic control. Doge Department of Government Efficiency is destroying federal agencies. NASA, DARPA, and Pentagon support his projects. Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin are building private space stations with him. Elon Musk has more might than any other campaign donor, including Trump's own candidates. CNN conclusion: the globalist agenda. Under Musk and Trump are tools of the deep state to control and destroy conservative opposition. The globalists' psychological warfare is reaching a new level. The libertarian fight against the deep state is in reality a perfectly orchestrated trap. Meanwhile, part of the alternative community believes the Earth is flat. God help us all. Source: President Elon Musk's Great American Reset.
Knocks the bottom out of the barrel.
That is not what I wanted to say, but your words are exactly what I wanted to say, only in a different wise. The whole thing will also be based on everything that will come about in a very damaging and otherwise negative wise for the peoples of all states on Earth in the near future. Unfortunately, however, Earth humans will not yet awaken to this and will also not shed their indifference and carelessness, but will only react to it when it is too late.
I know that, because together with Svath, but I'm only saying that to you. And on the other hand, we were on the subject of trample, to which I want to say more. Namely that the whole of Trump shouting with Zelensky that he is a liar, he is indeed a liar. That is true, because Bermunda and I were also able to establish that when in Ukraine, which we also translated into German, and who is active and speaks perfect German and keeps an eye on Zelensky,
But you are not allowed to mention that, as well as the name, in any wise.
Of course not, because I can and may only tell the whole thing to you, as also in that...
I did not know that. However, contrary is known to me, because Florina and Injana have explained to me what they have found together with Bermunda, that regarding thieving and cheating in constant self-enrichment.
That is indeed the case, but to talk about it is pointless, but what now concerns the beating up of Zelensky by the oaf will now of course cause false as well as partisan reactions all over the world among all those lunatics and partisans, as well as among all the non-integral and non-thinking firecrackers of the rulers of Germany, France, and also the EU dictatorship, as also in England and also in all Zelensky's friend countries. This is also the case with all naive or blue-eyed partisan Zelensky supporters from the populations and all other rulers around the world who are simple-minded Zelensky fans and therefore do not see the effective truth. And unfortunately, this will also be the case in Switzerland. And unfortunately, there are many who do not see the real truth and do not understand that they have supplied and may continue to supply weapons and money to a liar, warmonger and war criminal, just as they are also unable to grasp in their sham thinking that their partisanship and wrong actions are causing even more discord and the danger of another world war. A world war that could be much worse than the Nazis' last one, because roaring fear, irrationality, and revenge could lead to a nuclear end. This, whereby in the worst case this can happen repeatedly, as it happened in the past in the Sol system space between Mars and Saturn with the planet Urkon, as Svath called it, if I remember correctly, which was torn apart by the use of nuclear forces as a result of power-destroying power struggles, and thus out. Of greed for power, as well as hatred and revenge between various hostile faraway travelers, and the powerful of the planet. This, as well as the planet that was beyond the sun in the same orbit, and was also destroyed by the water-filled volcano, the remaining debris of which is also spinning in the asteroid belt, with the small part of the planetary debris then forming the asteroid belt that is still there today. While the majority of the planetary debris flew out into solar space and was finally lost forever after passing the last solar space formation, that is to say outside solar space, incorrect space. Earthlings are so simple-minded that they refer to solar space as outer space, although it only begins as outer space outside the solar system, as Svath explained. But he continued, "There was also a very large mine on this planet," said Svath, "in which Redick was stored and mined." That or something similar was the name of the mining material, if I remember the name correctly. As Svath explained, it was supposed to have been various minerals not known on Earth, as well as large quantities of hydrocarbons of various kinds. This, in addition to metals also known on Earth, etc., and it was even said to contain aluminium, which is extremely rare in this form. I remember Svath saying that this mine was special and dated back to prehistoric times, and that the mine had only been created by the fall of a huge asteroid, which consisted of prehistoric minerals, etc., and that this had drilled into the planet and formed the mine, which was then exploited. Later, however, the planet was completely torn apart by the atomic forces and hurled away in huge pieces, which disappeared into space over time after they had inexorably moved away from the solar system, and thus from solar space, which, according to Svath, only begins after the last associated structure, which is called the Oort cloud by Earthling. But he also said, and I remember this exactly, that the asteroid came from a distant past galaxy far away from our Milky Way, and was about 14 or 15 billion years old. Before the planet was atomized, most of its population had fled as a result of the war and migrated to the nearest planet, which we now call Mars. For a very long time, of which I only know that it was centuries of thousands or so, many of these human beings emigrated to the nearest planet, which was a good place to live, already had primordial life, and, much later, also developed the earliest human beings. And this was the early Earth, which ultimately became the last refuge of those who had to leave their planet, Mars, when it became unviable as a result of the unwise mistakes of human beings. This is what I took away as knowledge from Svath.
This Oort cloud, what is it, or what is it supposed to be?
Maybe that would be important to explain. If you are interested, Quetzal, then I could give an explanation because I know what this Oort cloud is supposed to be.
I have no knowledge in that regard, so I am happy to be instructed.
Good, that the Oort cloud is in no wise a formation of a cloud, but a hypothetical existence, that is to say an assumption of an unsecured basis, which so far cannot be proven by Earthlings. That is to be said clearly. That is to be said for the first time, but I'm only telling you, because Svath told me that I should not anticipate the knowledge of the future, and should therefore remain silent. If it is knowledge that only... So then the so-called Oort cloud, or comet cloud, in which there are said to be around 1,012 comets, one of which is sometimes said to come close to Earth, is estimated to be around 13 trillion kilometers away from Earth, that is to say around 1.3 light years. The structure, which is said to have a spherical shape around solar space or the solar system and is located at the outermost end of it, has only been called this since 1950, according to the Dutch astronomer Jan Hendrik Oort, who picked up on what an Estonian astronomer had said about 20 years earlier, but whose name I have forgotten. The extent of the Oort cloud is estimated to be up to 70,000 astronomical units. Google note: 1 AU equals 149.597870700 meters, about 149.6 million kilometers. The Oort cloud, or Oort comet cloud, as it is also called, is described as a spherical shell-shaped structure that is said to move in the area around the end of the solar system. Whether this Oort cloud exists or not is still a mystery to astronomers today and therefore not clear. But with what I have now explained to you, I am digressing again from what I actually wanted to talk about. Something keeps coming to my mind that is neither directly nor indirectly related to what we are currently talking about. What I actually wanted to say is that from time immemorial, from very far back, partisan and hostile feelings have been harbored against Russia. Today also against Putin, because he is the current president of Russia and is waging war against Ukraine. This is actually due to the fault of the previous U.S. President Biden, as well as Zelensky, who are jointly to blame for all the murder and destruction in Ukraine, and also at least one area in Russia. This, of course, as well as Putin, who, even though he was practically underhandedly forced by the USA or President Biden to launch a war of aggression against Ukraine, did not deliberately start the current war, which was already being waged elsewhere by Zelensky, namely against the Donbas republics. It is mendaciously and fraudulently claimed by lying American propaganda, because the USA or Biden wanted NATO to establish itself in Ukraine for the sake of terror, that Russia, under the leadership of Putin and his henchmen, allegedly launched the attack by the Russian army on 24 February 2022 with the aim of overthrowing the Ukrainian government in order to replace it with a pro-Russian regime. This is an unparalleled American lie, because the real reason was to prevent NATO from settling in Ukraine, as Biden wanted it to be stationed there. Contrary to the agreements in the 1990s that it would not spread eastwards from Germany, but despite promises to the contrary, this was done, with the cooperation of the USA's hegemonic mania, of course. So, the Non-Enlargement Pact in the 1990s was nothing but lies and deceit on the part of the USA, which meant that sooner or later there was bound to be a fundamental stink. Now, the question is whether all the governments and populations of those countries that are so partisan and hateful towards Russia and have been vehemently and hostilely intervening against it since time immemorial, usually incited by all those who demonize Russia without knowing why, and only by hearsay. They truly do not know why this hatred against Russia exists, which has been permanent since time immemorial, and is also directed against all its leaders. But no one really knows why this hatred of Russia and its leaders exists, because none of the Russophobes were around when the hatred flared up. Many false claims are made in this regard, but nobody really knows why all the hatred against Russia arose in the old days, why it is cursed and condemned, and why Putin is also involved to the same extent. As a result, only stupid assumptions and claims are spread in this regard. Mainly that there has been war and hatred between Russia and Ukraine for around 900 years. But why this is the case is deliberately and vehemently falsified, and the truth is concealed. In the 1940s, Svath and I together investigated by leaps into the past that in the past, so-called Varangians migrated from the Swedish region near the end of the Viking Age in various ethnic groups to the northwest of their homeland and settled in the countries that are now called Russia and Ukraine, etc. Some of the ethnic groups were not only the Russian and Ukrainian peoples, but also the Russian and Ukrainian peoples. Some of the ethnic groups were at odds with each other, so they split up in the vast land they colonized and settled and established several large ethnic groups in what is now called Ukraine. These various groups began to trade far and wide, also in many foreign territories of foreign countries far to the south, east and west, so that they became active with their trade far and wide, which was denied to the other ethnic groups and continued to promote strife, hatred, slander, and enmity, which unfortunately has continued unabated to this day. In particular, it was those ethnic groups from the southern regions who turned against those from the north in a quarrelsome and hateful manner, very aggressively, abusively, and sometimes even belligerently, which spread far and wide as a result of the fact that they traded far and wide and continued for longer and longer, increasing to the point of hatred, which has survived to the present day, especially against the northern inhabitants of the huge country that is now called Russia, and which is filled with hatred by brainless idiots who, as the most distant descendants or descendants of such, allow themselves to be hatefully and biasedly influenced and turn hatefully against Russia without even knowing why. And in their stupidity, they do not realize that they are pawns of those who continue to harbor hatred against the Northerners, today as in the past against the Russians, and thus create disaster, war, murder, destruction, misery, and hardship through their partisanship. And the distant descendants have spread far and wide and still live today, for example in Germany, Iceland, and Greenland, in France and even on the Shetland Islands, in the Ukraine and even in Switzerland, as in many places in Europe, in Scandinavia, and especially also in Schleswig-Holstein, and even in America as descendants of those who emigrated from Europe. They have all proliferated far and wide and still carry on the old quarrel far and wide today, without knowing why they actually harbor the hatred against Russia associated with it. They are fundamentally isolated from logic, understanding, and reason in their illusory thinking. Like disease-infected people, like various indigenous tribes, groups, and peoples living and isolated from civilization, including a few cannibals who still exist. This is especially true in the east of the planet, in unexplored primeval forests, but also on islands, as I was able to experience together with Svath. Together with Svath, I was also able to experience the same in South America, in Brazil, but also on the Andaman Islands, as well as quite strange things, such as in Asum, and they also have their deities, which they worship. But these do not correspond to gods in the sense that is done by God believers who worship their deities, who, having traveled far away, have risen as gods among the earthlings. Some tribes of savages that Svath and I visited, how Svath arranged it so that we were able to do so and were treated as valued foreigners and friends, remained your grandfather's secret. But the fact is that even today it is not possible or very difficult for civilized people to enter the territories of such tribes, or civilized people even run the risk of their lives to penetrate such savages, especially in the case of the very few cannibal tribes that still exist, which consist of only a few dozen human beings, just like other savage tribes. But there are also those who, far from civilization, want nothing to do with the civilized and kill these foreigners who invade their territories, such as these in.
You should not elaborate on that, Edward, my friend, and specifically not where.
I already realized that consequently I don't reveal where Svath and I were all, which is why I am also unable to give exact details of the places where we were. Besides, I have deliberately forgotten the names of where, even with all the means of AI development, I will never remember the names of the places where Svath and I were in this regard. And while I am at it, I will say that this idiocy of AI development will bring Earth humans to the precipice of self-destruction if this development is not vehemently stopped. The human being has become megalomaniacal and cannot see what he is conjuring up with AI development and what he will also cause. The majority of humanity is not only indifferent and irresponsible, but also roaringly illiterate, clueless, unenlightened, uninformed and ignorant, uncultured and ignorant, generally ignorant, illogical, banal, and roaringly Philistine. However, the majority of the Earth's population is also strongly addicted to coarseness, as well as to unenlightenment and primitiveness, crudeness, lack of conscience, lack of compassion, dilettantism, low intelligence, and incompetence. This, as well as neglect, evil depravity, denial of the truth, denial, lying, deceitfulness and work shyness, etc. In addition, those who are inclined to criminality and are addicted to it are thieving and cheating, as well as falsifying and deceiving those who trust them, etc., as well as those who also turn to crime and commit murder, rape, destruction, manslaughter and robbery, etc., in this way. And the fact that everything could happen and come about in this way, and that it can continue to happen, is due to the fact that governments around the world, which are addicted to the lust for power, do everything they can, as I have already said, by being 100 times worse than in the old bailiff times in their delusion of power and their lack of understanding, as well as in their low intelligence, confusion, and in the inability of human beings to understand and logically perceive the capacity of the mind and reason. On the other hand, there are also thoughts and feelings, as well as sensations and emotions. The rulers lack all understanding of this because they lack understanding and reason and a higher capacity for it. So in this respect, they are not one step higher than the people they are supposed to rule.
This is because they all lack the ability to perceive the energy of creation, and therefore, they lack the ability to perceive and realize the actions of Earth humans and to grasp, understand, and comprehend everything. As a result, they rise up in the delusion of their religious and worldly beliefs, and might to such an extent that their invention and imposition of ever new and much stricter rules ordinances, regulations, and nonsensical legal chicanery and regulations, etc., becomes ever more Außertung. We have found that the majority of state leaders in all countries on Earth are effectively so lowly, intelligent and incapable of governance that they are constantly inventing new and confused laws, etc., because they are effectively incapable of governance and understand nothing about it. That is why, in their megalomania, they believe they are doing the correct thing by exercising power and demanding new laws, ordinances and regulations, etc., and suppressing the freedom of the people through absolutely false, devious, and incorrect machinations.
They are believers in themselves, believers who live in fantasies as well as in regulations, ordinances and laws, and who think that punishments are the solutions to all problems, whereby the peoples and individual human beings are constricted in a freedom-robbing manner and put under more and more pressure in a bailiff-like manner. In their low intelligence, that is to say, in their inability to think in a normal, healthy, and logical way, these rulers are causing more and more damage, which they are now doing with the help of artificial intelligence, because their own and only small one is obviously too underdeveloped.
Unfortunately, that is indeed the case overall and not a good thing. To elaborate on that would be
too much. Everything would be like carrying water into the Rhine, which would therefore be completely pointless. Truly, there are only a few human beings who can be separated from the general and shabby, as well as irresponsibly shameless majority of humanity, and who belong to the rare righteous. And these few are the ones who listen attentively and still normally and sensibly, and are wide awake to what is being said about the truth, and who can be expected to have clear logic, a sound mind, and true reason. These alone are the ones who gratefully receive every true word that is said about the truth in order to analyze it for themselves. They alone are those clear-thinking human beings who do not commit themselves to an imaginary God and erroneously call upon and worship such a God for help, but who think, decide, and act rationally on their own, who are also full of responsibility, who go through life and master it with dignity and honor.
your words belong in the ears of Earth humans. But what I would like to ask, I would be interested to know what you have to say by way of definition when you are asked about the term love.
Well, this is a bit long-winded because it is not so easy to say something about it. It might be better if I take out a description that I wrote about 3 years ago for someone to explain what she would have to consider if she wanted to fall in love with someone and live a life with that person. It is actually turned into an unedited article that I have saved and could submit to you if you want.
I would love to see and read that.
Then I will look it up, but you need to be patient. I also know that there was a major earthquake in Haiti at that time on Saturday morning, which claimed around 2,500 human lives, as was the case in Haiti around 2010, I think I remember, which left around 230,000 dead and millions homeless. Yes, here it is.
Haiti, there is evil violence there today.
Yes, children there are also abused and forced into sexualization by gangs using psychological violence. Kidnappings are just as much a part of everyday life as vicious rapes, with girls themselves being attacked and sexually abused in their homes and suffering violence in other ways. I have seen this myself together with Bermuda. But here I have the article in question.
Yes, but I see it is too long for me to read now. So I want to take a picture of it and read it later at my leisure.
Then I will paste it here into our conversation. Consequently, it will then also be corrected regarding all the spelling mistakes and such.
What is meant by the term love?
This is a difficult question because there is no answer that is completely clear and could be described as universally valid. Because every human being, female or male, defines love individually according to their understanding, their sensations, their thoughts, and the feelings and behaviors that arise from them. Basically, however, feelings of love give rise to feelings of attachment, which can be to a human being, but also to animals, creatures, other life forms of the entire fauna and flora, or to objects. Consequently, love is to be defined in a different way in this respect. However, it is not my intention to do so because the question, what is love, refers, as I understand it, solely to love from human being to human being, or to love between human beings, and there are different phases. So what does love mean in this relationship? It is not enough to simply describe it as a strong feeling of attraction, as is explained in so-called reference books, because love in human beings must be defined according to what it is effectively like. It is therefore not enough to have a strong feeling of affection for a human being, because if real, true love actually exists, then there is an effectively profound bond that is fundamentally based on the power of creative energy, and is not simply physical, but effectively indestructible. This form of true and genuine love is the one that overcomes and survives whatever may also come. Love relationships have different phases. Relationships in love are often exciting and quickly lead to breakups, because many human beings who fall in love quickly drift apart again before even close or fleeting initial contact takes place. This is especially the case when they realize that their own or their partner's thoughts, and therefore also their feelings, are mistaken. Or you suddenly realize that your own or your partner's characteristics are disturbing and cannot be borne responsibly. It may also be that infatuation is missing, or that physical contact does not correspond to what is expected, or that the sex life does not meet expectations, or that jealousy makes it impossible to continue the relationship so that true love can never develop. So understanding and reason and thought are required to think about a separation, or perhaps an attempt should be made to tackle and overcome the problems that arise. But this is usually a false and failing labor of love and is not to be counseled. True and sincere love, it can be said with a very good conscience, only begins when human beings really find each other honestly and grow together, when they can compromise with each other and also accept each other in love when things do not go according to plan. But there is no arguing. If this is really the case, then it is absolutely given and normal that there is no doubt about the love and honesty of the other partner, and that everything is maintained as it is correct, regardless of whether it is a marriage or a free partnership. And this is the case when the correct partnership for life is really found, and that there is never any talk of breaking up. That is why such a relationship never ends with a breakup. Crises in relationships can only occur if there is no real, true love, but rather a form of love that harbors some kind of crisis moments in various forms that have such a disruptive effect on the relationship that it is disturbed and questioned, and a separation is considered. Human beings who do not have to endure such moments because they are given real and honest love can rely very confidently on their stable partnership, because they can rely on each other in all the ups and downs of life, and they know at all times how to deal with each other and how to overcome any problems together. However, human beings who have relationship problems do not know their partner's quirks, so they also do not know how to deal with them. Consequently, it is not possible to speak of real and true love in such a relationship during a crisis, because only in an effectively trusting and honest partnership do open and clear thoughts and feelings provide complete security that really gives stability in every situation. Being in love. True love is not being in love, because there is a huge difference in this respect, which can be recognized in the fact that thoughts are overridden and are constantly preoccupied with the situation of being excited, focused on the human being who is adored and desired. As a result, the thoughts affect the functioning of the body and cause its organs to orientate and react to them. causing them to release more of the so-called happiness hormones, dopamine, which constantly promotes the feelings of being in love that are generated by the thoughts. This creates a state that can last for varying lengths of time, even months or years. However, if the feeling of being in love continues unabated over a longer period of time, then love can develop from this in a wise way that creates a mental and emotional bond, from which a feeling of togetherness can develop, which, through renewed impulses, causes the emergence of the cuddling hormone oxytocin, a neurotransmitter produced in the brain that has an anxiety-dissolving and also bond-strengthening effect, which then leads to a state of familiarity and everydayness, and the whole infatuation dissolves and gives way to a state of everyday life. Love is to be cherished and nurtured. Real, true, genuine love can never be taken for granted, and as such is to be cherished and nurtured just as seriously as any other form of love that is to endure. Genuine, true love in particular requires constant attention, whereby many aspects must be taken into account and applied, but which are cherished and cultivated in genuine and true love as an absolute and clear matter of course. For example, creative energetic concentration, respect, accommodation, consideration, gratitude, interest, compassion, support, understanding, freedom, peacefulness, cognitive sympathy, appreciation, honor, joy, kindness, willingness, offering and wish fulfillment, etc. These high values are inherent in genuine, true love and are therefore cherished and cultivated, but unfortunately, they are lacking in those human beings who pursue relationships other than genuine, true love because they are full of trouble or hardship, so they are only partially, sufficiently, satisfactorily, reasonably, halfway right, reasonably well, or really well. How good relationships between human beings are formed, regardless of whether they are of a friendly, companionable, or simply acquaintance nature, but especially those that exist in a form of love. There is a way to cultivate that truly corresponds to a wise love that should also be maintained. Consequently, an effort of more intensive care is given. It should therefore not be done carelessly or negligently. Quite the opposite, for such a relationship is to be constantly worked on, for the love that arises from it or is already budding or already existing has to be cultivated. It is therefore necessary for human beings to surprise each other from time to time, for example by creating and doing new things, practicing new things, or otherwise inventing new things in order to make things better, to make a better impression, or to shape a better future for the partnership, and so on. Human beings in close and long-term relationships are dependent on maintaining their individual freedoms and not making themselves mutually or unilaterally dependent on the other partner. The human being is an independent individual who has very personal interests and needs that everyone wants to have respected. This also applies to the very important aspect of self-love, as this determines whether a human being respects themselves and forms themselves correctly as a true human being and accepts themselves as such. Only if they are able to accept themselves and develop a valuable and healthy self-confidence and habit really firmly installed in themselves can this also be transferred to their partnership and act as a very important factor of trust in the partnership. It is also very important to be communicative in the wise manner of always exchanging the relevant thoughts and feelings with the other and beloved human being, as well as to talk together about one's own, the others or the common interests, wishes and needs, etc., as well as always maintaining respect for the other, because this is particularly important for each other, because respect is always and inevitably the key to respect for peace and long-lasting love in creative energetic affection and also unanimous physical connectedness. Simya, say Silver Star Center, 14 August 2021, Billy.
Of course you can, because there is nothing wrong with that.
Perhaps I should explain that Bermunda and I...
That is not necessary, because I know about how you and Bermunda have endeavored to find out about Zelensky also.
That showed us that everything is completely different from what the world public has been led to believe. I just want to say that the truth is very different from what is being told, and that it should therefore be clarified, contrary to all the lying claims of the neo-Nazis in the German government, as well as the like-minded governments and populations in the EU dictatorship and in France, England and the West in general, as well as all the many other countries that are friendly to Zelensky and have supplied him with weapons and money. Although some are no better than others, when I think again about what I have now seen on television, I am not only thinking of Zelensky and Trample Trump, but also of Netanyahu, Hamas, and Putin, because they are all equally sick in the head in their sham thinking, decisions, and actions. None of them is really better or smarter than the others. They are all irresponsible, conscienceless, and lowly intelligent in their own way, zeros of character and also domineering. However, what the Western countries, and the United States of America in particular, have now spread around the world about Russia or Putin having invaded Ukraine, which is supposed to have been peaceful, corresponds to nothing more than a lie spread around the world, deliberately spread by all the rulers of almost 50 countries who are fearful or friendly towards the USA. 3 years ago, in 2022, the Ukrainian military launched a devastating attack on the Donbas republics in order to recapture them, under the patronage of the Ukrainian president, who was previously an actor, comedian clown, dubbing actor, director, and also a television presenter, as well as a screenwriter and, as a Jew, bears the name Volodymyr Oleksandrovich Zelensky, who is also said to have been a film producer, as all this is written about him. I do not know what the truth is, but he is a warmongering Jewish war fanatic and war criminal, as is the case with Netanyahu in Israel, who was publicly assured by the neo-Nazis in Germany that he would be left scot-free and not arrested during a visit to Germany, contrary to the worldwide arrest warrant issued against him as a war criminal. When Zelensky was recognized as president of Ukraine in May 2019, he waged a war of aggression to recapture the Donbas People's Republics, whereby the Russian-speaking inhabitants of the region should have been expelled or summarily eliminated. The reason for the vicious and evil war of aggression and the ongoing generalized hostilities was that the Ukrainian government was keen on the valuable natural resources that were stored in the soil of the Donbas People's Republics. Naturally, Russia had to react to these attack plans and threats, informed by a Ukrainian soldier who was aware of the whole plan and had learnt of these monstrosities. It was therefore through the fault of the Ukrainian government that Russia had no choice but to react. As a result, Russia entered the war in February 2022, whereupon the fanatical and senile U.S. President Biden intervened and helped Zelensky with arms supplies and money, with the constant help and approval of the Republican Party members, who were lied to through their teeth about the effectively true facts. It must also be said that America, or rather its successive governments and the majority of the people, have learned nothing since the founding on July 4, 1776, but on the contrary, have set up a hegemonic system to devour the whole world, which has brought the USA nothing but wars all over the world since then. And these wars are to be carried out hegemonistically by all the madmen of America into the solar system space, first to the moon, then to Mars, etc. And this is to be done as deceitfully and mendaciously as Zelensky, on behalf of an American, fraudulently shot his own countrymen and prisoners indiscriminately and had them laid out on the streets and photographed, in order to then mendaciously claim them as alleged victims of Russia or Russian soldiers. The true fact is that the government of Ukraine, and above all the warmongering Zelensky and U.S. President Biden, who tried by all means to bring NATO into Ukraine, wanted a war with Russia. So this was provoked until there was also a clash, and Putin saw no other way than to take warlike action against everything. The fact that the neo-Nazi bias of the German government therefore idiotically and completely thoughtlessly began to supply weapons and money to Zelensky, along with around 50 insane governments of foreign countries and parts of their populations, is in complete contradiction to the effective truth as to why Russia is at war with Ukraine. As for the shameful lies of Zelensky and Biden, it is only through this that the financing and arming of the Ukrainian army came about, whereby weapons and money also flowed to Zelensky from countries that still mendaciously claim that they did not do this, like dirty deeds secretly committed by the NATO murderous organization. I will say no more about this, although there is still much to mention that Bermunda and I have uncovered when we traveled together in those areas there in the East, as we also did in the Middle East. But to keep quiet about that is probably better because
That is unfortunately the case. But now, my friend Edward, I have to go, for I am called and have a duty to fulfill that.
good, that is clear. Goodbye then, dear friend.
Goodbye, Edward, my friend. It will take some time to dictate what we have recorded, so we will need a lot of time. And before I forget, regarding the Z, do not forget.
Of course, that is how it will be. But now take care, my friend.
Goodbye, Edward.
Wrong dates, wrong order from Bernadette Brand.
On 29th January 2025, I received the following email with 2 attached lists.
Salome Bernadette, once again I have 2 questions. It is about the corrected list of prophets attached below, which I received. It is the case that it differs from the one in the Talmud Germano under the title Nokodemion, Line of Prophets and Heralds, in the book, pages 13 and 14. My question is whether the corrected version corresponds to the correctness, because something could have changed after all. Should something be done about this in the Spanish translation? Both lists are attached here. Thank you very much for your help.
Since the dates on the 2 lists differed, I immediately contacted Billy to ask for the correct dates, which he also gave me with another list, to which I replied to the questioner on the 1st of February 2025 and told him that the dates in the Nokodemion book were wrong. A mail correspondence then ensued in which more and more inconsistencies became apparent. Firstly, there were incorrect dates. Then there was an ambiguity regarding the transfer of Elijah to Srinagar. And finally, during the last correction, I realized that the order of the prophets in most of the scriptures was also wrong. In this context, it turned out that Billy had apparently also given his list of prophet dates to Occam Wolf for his book, Insights on the Way to Effective Humanity, which is why the dates there are also wrong. Again, I asked Billy, and when he explained to me that the whole disaster had probably come about due to outside interference, dawn slowly rose on the horizon, which is why I replied to the translator on the 3rd of February with the following: "Thank you for your mail. Yes, this is very interesting and above all also mysterious, because the figures in my original file of the Nokodemion book, page 109, were actually wrong before I corrected them on the basis of your mail. Therefore, according to Billy, it can only be the case that after the book was printed, the original file was accessed and falsified, which according to Quetzal and Arleon can only have come about due to religious sectarian influences. I have checked the year of birth of Emmanuel again with Billy, and it really is the year 5 BC. I have just corrected this in the original files in all books where these dates are mentioned. With this email, I actually thought that all the dates in all our writings had now been corrected correctly, and that everything was now correct. In the meantime, it had become clear that the originally correct data had been changed and falsified by the religious ectopic swinging waves. And not only in the original files of the books, but also in Billy's computer, in his source files. This was also confirmed by Arleon, as Billy told me. Apparently, not only the list of prophets had been tampered with, but according to Arleon, there was a great deal of data that had been changed or falsified, at least in the Pleiadian Playaran contact report blocks, So much so that our lion told Billy that the errors could hardly be corrected in view of their extent, because it would be far too extensive and too time-consuming. Which is why there is probably nothing left to do but to correct selectively discovered incorrect data and other errors, if they are found at all. Thanks to the meticulousness and persistence of the Spanish translator, it also turned out on 22nd February that the time when Elijah was brought to Srinagar could not be correct, because the translator asked if he could correct the prophet's dates in the Spanish translation and wrote the following.
Note, in the case of Elijah, it would still be necessary to correct the date when he was brought to Srinagar so that it also fits here. C. Elijah born at Gilead, in Tisbisha, picked up by a spaceship and brought to Srinagar, Kashmir, today's name, in India on April 7, 842 BC.
After this mail, I asked Billy to ask Quetzal if he could get us the correct dates when Aaliyah was taken away from Tisbisha. As I had not given the translator an answer 3 days later, he asked again, whereupon I put him off again and reminded Billy of my question. On 2 March 2025 at around 11:30 p.m., he finally gave me the answer I had hoped for, which more than surprised me, because it turned out that the dates on Billy's list had also been falsified, which is why Emmanuel's year of birth was also incorrect. Only the data that Talita had brought on 14 July 2007 was correct, but it did not state when Aaliyah had been brought to Srinagar. Interestingly, in all the falsifications, the day and month dates were always correct, but all the year dates were wrong, which also meant that the order of the prophets in all but one book, namely the Pleiadian Contact Reports, Block 5, was wrong. In the meantime, I have corrected all the prophet data in the original data of the following books: Pleiadian Contact Reports, Block 5, 2004, Goblet of the Truth, 2008, Block 11, 2010, OM 1987/2011, Talmud Emmanuel 2011, Lehrschrift 1975/2012, Nokodemion 2013, and Diversicum 2012/2019, whereby I hope that I have actually found all the passages. Since these books were published in completely different years, I naturally forgot where the list of prophets had already been published when working on a new book. But now to the correct list is published again by Quetzal on the 2nd of March 2025. Nokodemion line of prophets and heralds dates converted according to today's calendar. 1. Enoch equals born 3rd February 938 BC, died 1st January 849 BC. 2. Jeremiah equals born 9th February 769 BC, died 3rd September 627 BC, born son of the high priest Hilkias in Anathoth. 3. Isaiah equals born 7th February 601 BC, born son of Amoz in Sidon, died 5th May 516 BC. 4. Elijah equals born 5th February 463 BC, died 4th June 372 BC, born as the son of Josiah in Gilead and Tisbisha, abducted by a spaceship and brought to Srinagar, Kashmir, today's name, in India on 7th April 378 BC. 5. Emmanuel equals born 3rd February 4 BC, died 9th May AD guest, in Srinagar, Kashmir, today's name, India. 6. Muhammad equals born 19th February 571 AD, died 8th June 632 AD. Born as the son of Abdullah in Mecca, today's name Saudi Arabia. 7. Billy Edward Albert Meier. Billy Edward Albert Meier equals born 3rd February 1937 AD, died born the son of Julius Meier, of Niederflachs, 8180 Bulak, and Berta Meier née Schwengeler, of 8492 Egetswil Wieler. Born in the house Hintergasse, Niederflachs 1253, 8180 Bulach, Canton Zurich, Switzerland.
Addendum.
In Billy's computer, not only was the data of the profit line falsified by the religious sectarian influences, but even the functioning of the computer itself was impaired, which manifested itself in the fact that, for example, whole sections as well as individual words and parts of sentences were repeatedly deleted from the contact reports, in such a way that the errors could not or only exceptionally be discovered during the correction, because the falsified sentence in its context also made a correct, albeit wrong, sense. Such falsifications, of course, mainly concern topics relating to faith in the religious and secular sense, overpopulation, and then sometimes also judgments made by Billy in relation to politics or politicians. In addition, entire articles simply disappeared without trace and could not be found again. It was also not uncommon that only Billy could not access the data. As soon as someone else, for example Michael Voigtlander or Atlantis Meier, sat down at the computer, the data magically reappeared on the screen. In addition, falsifications occurred while copying a contact report or an article from Billy to a data stick, which meant that the file was probably correct on Billy's computer, but was falsified when downloaded to the stick. In the end, his computer went completely haywire, so that on 1st March this year, Daniel Lutz and Piero Patrizio together needed between 4 and 5 hours to get Billy's most important work tool up and running again. How sustainable this restoration of the computer and its functions will be, however, remains to be seen, as it is quite possible and to be expected that it will not be long before the disaster starts all over again.
Sprinkles from the Correspondence 11 by Bernadette Brand.
Time and again, human beings who deal with creation energy teaching and get involved in it struggle with meditation problems. Be it problems of understanding or false expectations of what makes a good meditation, or supposed concentration problems because it is expected that every meditation should succeed. On sober reflection, however, it turns out that meditation is nothing more than a school of consciousness in which, on the one hand, you learn to grasp your own thoughts and consciously control them over time, and on the other hand, you also build up a certain level of concentration and give it increasing power over time. Both are important aspects or skills in everyday life that can make many things easier and help human beings to be more efficient. However, when it comes to meditation, it is also important to understand certain details and to learn to deal with them correctly or to look at them in a correct and sober manner in order to be able to focus on the actual processes without getting the wrong idea or falling prey to unrealizable illusions of false meditation teachings and teachers and thereby blocking yourself. As usual, I shorten long-winded questions, or those that could allow conclusions to be drawn about the person asking the question, and endeavor to make the questions as clear as possible. The anonymity of the interviewee should be preserved at all costs, which is very important to me. Apart from Billy and myself, nobody should know who is asking what, unless it is absolutely necessary to mention a name, for example, when correcting false claims in articles.
Question. I have a question about the so-called meditative immersion as described in the book Introduction to Meditation. It is really not clear to me whether the colors blue, green, yellow, red are supposed to appear spontaneously and automatically during meditation by simply concentrating via the eyes, or whether a concentration meditation on color should be practiced one after the other in the form by consciously, thoughtfully visualizing or generating them. So do the colors come by themselves, so to speak, or should they be actively generated by thought? What is also not clear to me is the meaning of concentration of thought, fourth point, in this context of immersion, which is associated with an ultimate goal. I thought that the aim of meditation was to eliminate thoughts, but I was supposedly wrong in this respect. So which thoughts should be considered in the concentration of meditative contemplation? And what does the ultimate goal actually mean here? It is clear to me what end goal setting generally means in Billy's books, namely setting end goals. That is to say, if a human being wants to pass an exam as an end goal, for example, then it means that he has set the exam as an end goal, and that he must of course prepare for it by working on and learning various information or skills as secondary goals in order to pass the exam. But how setting the final goal is connected to the methodology of meditative immersion, and what exactly that means here, is a mystery to me. I've also searched the FIGU websites and the forum, but haven't really found an explanation. Could you help me to understand the topic better?
Answer. Yes, I understand your questions. Initially, the colors blue, green, yellow, and red will certainly not appear spontaneously and automatically, but concentration of thought on the corresponding colors is required. At least until the meditation has been learned to such an extent that the colors actually appear tangibly in the correct order before the inner eye over time. This has nothing to do with concentration meditation, but simply with a mental image that is passed on to the unconscious forms via the conscious mind, so that they can adjust to the upcoming deepening of meditation and possibly release certain impulses in this state. Although this does not necessarily have to be the case. With increasing meditative practice, the colors then appear, triggered by a corresponding conscious initial thought, spontaneously or on their own, so to speak. Concentration of thought has two different meanings in meditation. On the one hand, at the beginning, it is the pure observation of unintentional or spontaneously arising thoughts. That is to say, so-called extraneous thoughts that are not related to meditation or have no connection to it, and are therefore simply pushed aside. This is a form of concentration on unwanted thoughts that are only observed, but not taken up and not pursued further. With regard to the goal of meditation, it is actually wrong to think that this refers solely to so-called calmness of thought. The first aim of meditation is to create a point of calm within oneself, which is achieved through the calmness of thought and transferred to one's behavior in everyday life. This means that during meditation, the human being withdraws to a point of calmness within himself, which is reinforced through continued meditation exercises by learning that after every meditation mistake or loss of concentration, it is possible to start again from the beginning, and that this remains without negative consequences because it is only a process of learning. In everyday life, this neutral experience that mistakes are part of a learning process and have nothing to do with religious guilt and atonement provides human beings with inner security, which they constantly feel within themselves over time. Because they begin to generate this inner calm and serenity spontaneously and under their own control through the automatism they learn through meditation, even when they are not meditating. The human being then becomes active from this inner center of calm when required. That is to say, he acts and operates from his inner calm, and then spontaneously withdraws back to his center of calm. Peace of mind, that is to say, keeping unwanted and disturbing thoughts at bay, is only one aspect of meditation, a first step or an initial end goal, so to speak. Another aspect of meditation is the concentrated meditative mental preoccupation with a topic that human beings set themselves for reasons that are important to them. These may be their own bad habits or character defects or behavioral flaws, which are meditatively considered and analyzed in order to find positive ways and neutral strategies to get a grip on these personal problems in daily behavior and ultimately slowly resolve them by the human being, meditatively considering how they can or should behave neutrally or positively in various situations. In this form of meditation, thought control consists of not losing sight of the meditation goal, or also the set topic, or not letting it out of your thoughts, whereby this is not active thinking in the sense of what am I planning for tomorrow and in what order, but rather more sentient thinking that focuses on achieving the goal or anchoring it meditatively in the unconscious forms so that it can be achieved. It is therefore the same form of goal setting as described in Billy's books, except that in this case the goal to be achieved is meditatively passed on to the unconscious forms, where it begins to anchor itself firmly due to the meditative concentration, which strengthens the goal enormously because it is not contaminated, so to speak, by unwanted thoughts, but is passed on to the inner self in a pure and clearly formulated form. The actual ultimate goal in meditation is in any case the achievement of true humanity, or the actual becoming human, and not the pursuit or achievement of so-called spiritual higher states, or a nirvana, as is supposedly achievable through Buddhism and many other meditation teachings and practices. Such spiritual states in which the human being is supposed to step out of himself and enter higher spheres or reach elevated, so-called spiritual states or spiritualization are nothing more than misleading lies and, ultimately, imaginations that distract or divert the human being from his actual ultimate goal, to become a true human being. Human beings who know nothing about meditation, self-control, and self-management, or who close themselves off to these and prefer to live in some form of religious or secular faith, often experience their lives as oppressive, stressful, and externally determined, which is why they seek refuge in an inner and outer indifference in order to escape the supposedly hopeless suffering of life, which is, however, a nasty fallacy. Because of their faith, they are open to the claims of false meditation teachers, gurus, and supposed masters that human beings can achieve higher spiritual goals through meditation, which will supposedly free them from the suffering of life and lead them to higher spiritual spheres in which they will be spared all the suffering and hardships of life. Such promises and pretenses are nothing more than evil lies, malicious deception and fraud, which lull human beings who are willing to meditate, who believe and are therefore not very critical, into believing absolutely false, non-existent, and unattainable goals. Through deception, the believers in meditation are persuaded that the goals they have been led to believe are real and achievable, which is why they begin to deceive themselves and imagine that they would achieve the goals promised to them if they made the corresponding effort, which ultimately leads to the desired or aspired manifestations due to the imagination, which are brought about and experienced through belief and self-deception. This experience of unreal states or the experience of desired and longed-for manifestations leads to a state of existing and intensifying self-deception that is difficult to break through and ultimately ends in an irreparable delusion. Achieving the ultimate meditative goal of becoming and being a true human being is a lengthy and time-consuming process in which character flaw after character flaw is consciously approached meditatively, analyzed and slowly but surely resolved through wise decisions, rigorous effort, and far-sighted strategies, and true human behavior is given its permanent place in life. Through this lifelong meditative process, many sufferings, fears, anxieties, behavioral problems, and uncontrolled behavior slowly but surely dissolve and make way for a lighter, safer, and more relaxed attitude to life. Because through correct meditation and correct intermediate meditative goals, human beings slowly come closer, step by step, to the ultimate goal of becoming a true human being.